Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 46 of the Transgender School podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode because we have on as a guest a longtime friend of mine and my family, Sophia Alexander. Sophia and I first met in 2017 through various political campaigns here in the Bay Area. She's got a really interesting background. We're going to do two episodes, one talking about politics and current events, and one diving a little bit more into Sophia's background. To give you a high-level introduction to her, she was in the Navy as a cryptologic technician technical for 6 years, from 2008 to 2014, and served aboard the guided missile cruiser CG-53 on two separate deployments to the Persian Gulf and the Middle East area of operations. Sophia was also recently elected to the Uptown Community Planning Group, where she now lives in San Diego. And I'm really excited to have her on the podcast today. Sophia, what did I leave out? Welcome to the show.
No, I think you nailed it. I'm super excited to be here. Really happy to be here with two friends and hopefully we have a great time. Great discussion.
I'm so happy to have you here with us too, Sophia. I consider you a friend as well, and I'm super excited that you might be able to join us again for Thanksgiving. So I just want everybody to know we love Sophia like a family member, and we've been blessed to get to have her be with us for several, I think, Thanksgivings at this point. We're really grateful to you for having this conversation with us today, Sophia.
See, I think you show so clearly right there how easy it is to love you guys because you guys are just top tier people. So
Well, I feel the same way about you. I appreciate that. So I know we
yeah.
text a lot about current events, politics, funny, stupid things people post on the internet. And I know there's a lot of issues that are top of mind right now. All of this is especially relevant in the larger cultural conversation because of the upcoming election. So that's a good place where I would love to start. It's just, what are your thoughts on the state of the election? What keeps you up at night? What gives you hope? And what do you think is going to happen if you had to make some kind of prediction at this point?
So one of the things that happens a lot is I go out and we have like a little bit of a nightlife group of pretty consistent friends here, and a lot of those people that I associate with are basically young men, and talking to them about politics is extremely disheartening sometimes because you can see that they're spending a lot of time online, they're spending a lot of time on YouTube, they're getting a lot of advice from the so-called manosphere kinds of people like Joe Rogan and like Andrew Tate and all these kinds of wackadoodles. There's a less polite language that I use when I normally talk about those people. And it's also top of mind for me because, like you said, I just did this election and doing door to door politicking again, campaigning, asking people what's going on. You get the whole gamut of reactions where some people don't know about anything, they don't care, and they don't want to care. Some people think that everything is corrupt and both sides are exactly the same. That kind of deep seated cynicism, just a complete refusal to engage with the system is that's probably the most frustrating part of it to me. And then talking to these young guys who are saying both sides are the same, everyone is corrupt, all politicians are just basically evil sacks of shit. I think it's almost a form of self protection where they love to go down issues and have discussions and then end up being misinformed or totally wrong, not informed, not necessarily misinformed, but not informed. And the way those discussions always go is we pick a topic, drill down into it, come up with a bunch of stuff. They end up being really wrong in a lot of ways, and then retreat into their protective carapace of, well, I don't even care about this anyways. I don't vote. They're all evil. Both sides are the same. That kind of thing. It's extremely frustrating to see. And I think that ties directly into gendered gaps that we're seeing in electoral politics, especially among young people. So we're seeing Gen Z women staying or becoming more liberal, and then Gen Z men becoming more conservative, buying into all sorts of very strange political views, attaching themselves to strange political issues. So, yeah, that's a really big thing that I think is happening a lot here. One of the things that makes me think about is, in regards to being transgender, is that I think trans people are a pretty severely underutilized resource for what is probably the most persistent sociological divide in human history with the men versus women. And when you have gaps like that have always been there, that have always been in tension with each other, hey, maybe we could have a group of people that kind of see both sides of the issue a little bit. You know what I mean? That can speak to both sides' experiences and how those experiences have changed as they go through a transition. But that has never materialized in any significant way as the transgender movement has happened. The discussion about trans people keeps getting derailed into pretty nonsensical red herring topics, as far as I'm concerned, and is subject to like so many weird double standards and just lots of immediately following call it the gender revolution in around 2015. The first red herring that came up was the bathroom bill laws and all of that nonsense. It was a big crisis. It was taking up a lot of airtime, sucking up basically the oxygen of the entire political discussion at that time for a good period of months. Catastrophic language coming from right wingers who are probably predisposed to hate transgender people, regardless of whatever issue they want to take and make into a mountain. Lo and behold, all these years later, didn't become an issue, never became a serious problem. A lot of right-leaning states with red legislatures basically did end up passing and enacting bathroom bill laws. Texas and Kansas, which is where I'm originally from, are two of the ones that did it. And these are laws that are not serving any function. They're not uplifting our nation's dignity. They're not protecting anybody. They're not addressing a problem that existed. They exist because they're red meat legislation that is popular to people that think about it for half a second, or like I said before, are predisposed to already hating trans people. They have the effect of creating these hostile situations that can turn it already a little bit scary of a situation, a stressful situation of using the restroom in public for a trans person, into the capacity for danger, for sexual violence, for murder, all sorts of bad things. Interactions with law enforcement, invasions of privacy, the whole, what's the word that people are using? The transvestigation type of thing, where, say, like masculine women are being accused of being called trans people and being investigated, and then people are getting into a really crazy, weird place where they're like, okay, drop your underwear and let's see what you got. It's completely, we started from a non-genuine issue in a disingenuous red herring wedge issue for electoral purposes, and then it spirals into this really insane situation that I don't think any pragmatic, reasonable person can agree that no one would agree that this is like a sane place to be. And again, it's solving an issue that didn't exist.
And why do you think, I mean, I have my own theory that I've articulated on this show, that Republicans are using these issues to distract from the fact that their actual policies are not helping the people who are voting for them for the most part. I'm curious why you think Republicans have become so attached to this issue. And the initial lesson of the bathroom ban or the bathroom bills seemed to be that that was a mistake and that businesses pulled out of the state and that it was a bad idea and that Republicans should really focus on other issues. But then somehow we've come back to this. So why do you think that they're so committed to this?
The most radical line in human history is the line between men and women. That is in terms of divisions of people, the most red line, bright line that there is in sociological terms. And I fully understand to genuine, good intentioned, informed people that the idea of changing genders can and is a radical notion. For sure. I totally get that. I think that sort of natural hesitancy, until you read a lot of medical papers, until you read about the history of trans people, until you read about the naturally occurring stuff. I think that until you've done that sort of pretty intense research that most people aren't going to do on a really small, non-important niche issue, they're going to naturally gravitate toward that stuff. And because these policies are going to be targeting the sort of high engagement in other issue voters, but low information on this particular issue with a natural disposition against it. It's the perfect issue for red meat. And it's an easy wedge issue. It's an easy red meat issue. The experience that I had with Donald Trump and his military ban of trans people was I got on a flight. I was flying to Virginia for a conference for a big scholarship that I won. And when I got on the plane, I could join the military. And I was, in fact, planning on rejoining the military as an officer after I graduated. And when I got off the plane, I couldn't be in the military anymore because he tweeted out that trans people are banned. Out of the blue, for no reason, again, addressing an issue that didn't exist. There was no functional reason for it. The DOD and military officers said it was a bad policy. They were blindsided by it. This is red meat for electoral reasons. And that unfortunately happens with lots of issues. And then you add in bad faith actors and disingenuous issues that are being spun up again. Years ago, going after the bathroom bill stuff, to kind of trace out the rhetoric of the stuff a little bit, after the bathroom bill thing, there came basically Joe Rogan inserting this issue into the public conscious, where he was talking about trans athletes and all this stuff. And I don't want to get into that and the merits of what should be decided there or not. It's to me an issue that was always kind of a backdoor way of getting a big dislike of transgender people, in a big sense that they're hurting women, in a big sense that they're trying to do things that aren't appropriate for them to do for reasons that are suspicious. It was a way to get all of those kinds of feelings into the minds of the populace. And I don't think Joe Rogan in particular, I don't think he did it in like a malicious 4D chess way, because he is a sports guy and he's not
the sharpest
super
tool
creative,
in the
evil
shed.
genius guy. What'd you say?
He's not the sharpest tool in the shed.
I'm not trying to say it like that. I don't think he's like a bad, malicious person. I don't hate the guy. Yeah, he's just he's really into MMA, and he saw some MMA fighters, and so he started making hay out of it, and then that caught on, and then bad faith actors are gonna amplify that message and disseminate it across the media, and especially that type of manosphere, like YouTube, podcast corner of the internet, where we see so many of our young men spending time right now. Do you know what I mean? I think that's exactly how this sort of stuff goes. That sort of vague dislike of trans people from those sorts of discussions, that sort of vague suspiciousness that's brought about because of these very few individuals in these very few situations that most people don't care about at all. Like, nobody cares about women's sports except for when they bring this stuff up. It's very frustrating. And you see what happened years later is public sentiment is turning against trans people. Most people are starting to believe these types of a man can't become a woman, blah, 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 like all that type of stuff. You see it with Dave Chappelle's comedy specials, accusing trans women of being in, what's the word? Women's, there's a word for it. Like
Spaces?
Blackface? Like women face.
Okay. Woman
Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
I hadn't heard that. That's
like
that's
blackface.
clever.
Yeah, it is clever. And that's the type of really clever, I would say insidious kind of rhetorical tricks that are going against it and playing into, like I said, a natural suspicion of a pretty radical thing. And it's also a brand new political movement. We have to remember that the trans movement really started only in 2015. Obviously, Donald Trump was happening at that time as well. So that was sucking a lot of the air out of informed discussion in America. We kind of immediately ended policy discussion, informed discussion, and he dragged the country's national discourse down to probably the lowest level that it's ever been. So, yeah, I think that's exactly what's been going on with the trans movement. And again, it makes me sad because we're an underutilized resource for talking about the perspective of men and the perspective of women. And a frustrating thing about this is that they only ever talk about male to female transgender people, not female to male transgender people, which is extremely frustrating to me. This goes into...
Well, they do, but there's a different paradigm. The paradigm for male to female trans people is that we're predators and we're putting on woman face and we're going to go get someone in a bathroom. The narrative with female to male trans people is that they're young girls being taken advantage of, and this medical establishment is convincing them to have irreparable surgeries, and that they're just depressed, and that they shouldn't be taking testosterone and all this. So they have their own whole narrative, but it's more of a victim. It's fucked up in its own way, but it's more of a
Yeah.
trans
No,
person
you're
as
you're
victim
right,
of the
because
medical establishment.
yeah, exactly. It's the same classical big sexism, low-key sexism that happens to every woman probably that ever lived, where they take away their agency, they become most politically potent as victims and not as actors. Their own experiences are spoken over, are ignored, are weaponized. One of the things that I think is the saddest thing that's happening is when they take people that detransition and then hold them up and say, look, this person's life was ruined, and that's why we need to put us into this entire thing. And the reason that makes me so mad is because for someone to go through that amount of internal struggle and strife and confusion of identity to think that they're trans, transition medically in these cases, in these exceptionally rare cases that they're talking about, and then detransition, it's tragic. That's a horrible experience for any person to go through. And what they need is not to be held up as a political weapon. What they need is support and resources and empathy, and to address the system and say, how did we let these edge cases fall through the cracks? How can we prevent this more in the future? And the solution to preventing it in the future is not to say, oh, we just need to stop all trans care, because then more people are going to die. More people are going to commit suicide. More people are going to fall victim to self-harm and self-hatred, and going back in the closet is what that ends up being. What the solution is figuring out policy solutions, is studying the science, is figuring out, examining the cases in these situations happen, and figuring out exactly what went wrong. I would wager there's probably no systematic element going on. I bet it's individual cases or individual care providers that made a bad call, or the person had multiple issues that weren't being controlled for. Like I said, it's a bona fide tragedy, and then they're trying to make political hay out of it instead and demonize the entire thing. And I think most detransition people are probably not appreciative of that. I think that they probably overall support trans people and the trans movement. They were open enough to it in the first place. They can relate to, even more than most trans people, probably having that feeling of confused, frustrated gender identity. Yeah, that one, as you can see, got me on a lung tear there. That one really gets me. That one really gets me.
Well, Sophia, if
Yeah.
I could jump in, that one really gets me too. And I want to say something about that, because I do intake for a support group of parents of trans kids, and I talk with a lot of parents. I'm in a lot of parent groups to try to educate parents about their trans kids. And I hear this almost every time when a parent finds out or is told that their kid is trans, when their kid comes out. There are all these articles out there apparently about detransitioners and how common it is and how this is happening all over the place. And I try to explain, I try so hard. I am in groups with thousands of trans people. I've never met or heard of anyone in real life who's detransitioned. The way it's blown out of proportion, and there are articles and there are people on podcasts and such uninformed people out there talking about how it's actually common. And so that parents, when their young kids are coming out, young or young adult kids are coming out, they're really believing this stuff, and they're really thinking that this is what's happening with their kids, that their kid is just confused and they're just going to make a mistake. And so I'm really glad that you addressed it, and I really want people to know that that is extremely rare. Sophia said exceptionally rare. Edge cases, like I've been for 7 years in all these different groups, and so many people never ever heard of a person in real life, other than people who supposedly are talked about in articles that people have. So I really want people to know this is not a thing, and it's not something, it's being used in this way to mislead you.
Yeah, I think you said it so well right there. It is exceptionally rare. Like I said, I don't think it's systemic. And and this is another area that is frustrating about the discussion with this stuff is that you have this sort of fear mongering. I can't relate, but I can imagine you being a parent, having your kids come out as trans. That would be extremely scary. And of course, as a parent, you want the best for your kids. You don't want them to make a mistake of this sort of magnitude. You never want your kids to be unsafe. As you learn about the treatments, you learn about their effectiveness, you learn about what's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of natural fear and a lot of natural, hey, are you sure? And that's exactly why the healthcare standards are the way they are. That's exactly why transition should always occur with a team of involved parents, the individual, healthcare providers, mental health providers, and trans specialists. When you have a team of people in consultation like that, that's exactly how you avoid these sorts of edge cases, these terrible tragedies. And that's exactly why demonizing it and reducing resources and reducing attention on this isn't the way to do it. It's counterproductive. If you want more people to end up in those situations, keep on demonizing it, keep on pushing people back in the closet, keep on making it harder for trans people to live. Yeah, it's like I said, these situations are situations that are being weaponized by disingenuous, bad faith people for the purposes of fear mongering and harming groups that they don't like for electoral purposes because it's easy. It's easy to get people riled up about this, and it makes sense to me. One of the things that I would bring up about it is you can compare the sort of rhetoric that I'm using right now, where I'm trying to be very thoughtful and very empathetic to all the different parties involved and very nuanced about the policies and about the impacts that they're having on people, versus the rhetoric that the other side is using, where they're saying, oh, there's no nuance to this. It's a terrible thing. Fear mongering tactics. When people want to scare you like that, you can usually tell they're trying to sell you something. They're trying to get you to turn your brain off. There's just a lot of misinformation, fear mongering out there regarding these issues, and I really don't appreciate the way that they're taking advantage of detransitioners' bona fide sadness and tragedy. Ties into something that I want to talk about, going back to the political cynicism and lack of engagement. It's interesting to see these people, especially these young men that I'm around right now, and of course that's all anecdotal, but I think if I did some research and digging into it sociologically and pulling, you'd see some evidence for what I'm about to say. I think these young men especially, are getting their information from these sort of sources. They're spending hours a day on YouTube, hours a day listening to these podcasts, consuming memes. The zeitgeist of the memes, the zeitgeist of these spaces isn't courageous. It's not about becoming better. It's not about improvement. It's not about the problems with the world and how to get involved. It's about cynicism and how nothing will ever change and things are the worst they've ever been. Everyone's trying to take advantage of you and you can never get to the right answer because the world is full of cloaked conspiracy theories and 4D chess maneuvers trying to mislead you and all those sorts of things. I'm a believer that no matter how smart you are, no matter how informed you are, no matter how self-assured you are, if you expose yourself to propaganda on a widespread basis over enough time, you can start to be misled. And I think that's exactly what you see. It breeds this atmosphere in this environment in our young men of your problems aren't you're creating. You need to blame these other groups. You need to be mad at women. You need to be mad at girls. You need to worry about trans people. You need to not engage in the political system. Don't vote. Losers vote. Both sides are the same. All that sort of cynical, self-protective rhetoric, I think, is very much coming from that sort of group. And it's very much an organized thing. Do you guys know who Chris Rufo is?
Yeah. He's
So
part of that
Chris
whole,
Rufo,
like, is he Matt Walsh adjacent, that kind of person?
Yeah, he's I would say he's pretty Matt Walsh adjacent. Yeah,
Okay.
he's
Yeah,
currently
I know who
I
this guy
believe,
is.
yeah, I think he's currently the president or some sort of administrator for Ron DeSantis's college experiment, where they took over a liberal arts college in Florida, and they basically told Chris, who's a far right activist, online troll kind of guy, they basically gave him a college and said, make a de-wokeified college. And we'll see how that experiment works out. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to go just great. We'll see how that ends up. But Chris is fascinating because he was basically a failed filmmaker and then realized that he had a real knack for coming up with sticky rhetorical slogans. And he's the one that came up with the drag queen story time. That whole fiasco that happened, what was that, in the last like 2 years, 3 years, and then kind of died out and fizzled out again. It was just their latest talking point against transgender people. He's the one that explicitly and intentionally came up with that as a way to fearmonger. He's done articles with classical media figures bragging about how brilliant he was and how he toyed with the messaging until he found the exact right wording that he thought would stick. This is not an unintentional thing. There was a scandal that came out in the last couple days where Tim Pool and some of those other more far right people, again, Matt Walsh adjacent and stuff, they are being paid by Russia to spread their stuff. And they're claiming that they didn't know what was going on. And they were getting paid $100,000 a week and not asking about where the source was at the best case scenario.
Yeah, it's like an
And it's like,
9-figure operation. Russia was
yeah,
this was a big thing. Russia set up an entire production company in the United States just to put this stuff out.
yep, exactly. And it all, I'm telling you, it all goes right back into that little weird dark corner of the internet where, again, our boys and our young men are spending most of their waking hours. And it's frustrating because, on the one hand, I don't think that we should talk about only men's issues and hold them over feminism and women's rights and trans stuff. In terms of like the gender political discussion, maybe we should balance it out a lot. But it seems like they feel ignored, even though these issues do get discussed, even though I've been trying to discuss these issues for years. Even though in the military, I knew the majority of the men that I served with, and these are really young men. These are like, you're in the military from 18 to 25, maybe 30, having mental health breaks, feeling isolated, having suicidal ideation, all these really bad things that were happening to them. And because they felt like they should be men, they should stuff it down, they should instrumentalize themselves and become only what they can provide to others. That's not a healthy way to be. And there's, I think, space in the gender political discussion, in the feminist discussion, in the anti-patriarchal discussion for those kinds of issues to be brought up. One of my least favorite ones is when I talk about gun control. I always immediately bring up the fact that the majority of them are suicides. Well, not the majority, but about 45 to 50% every year are suicides. And the leading people that are killing themselves are white men with guns killing themselves with pistols and rifles. And when you bring that up, nobody wants to have that discussion. Nobody wants to stop white people from killing themselves. I think it's about 60% of suicides in America that happen like that. That's tragic. And these manosphere people don't care about that. There's no appetite for that sort of discussion for men's health and well-being. There's no sort of appetite for the discussion of where these incel movements are coming from, about where all this nihilism and pessimism and frustrations are coming from, where this male anger, this young male anger is coming from. And there's no discussion about the instrumentalization of their struggle right now. And again, that ties it right back into, to me, the trans movement, where you can see, as a trans person, I lived the first portion of my life presenting as a guy and being in guy spaces and also existing outside of that internally because I know I'm not a guy. And then transitioning and saying, okay, so now I have a wider view of it and a better view of it. And women's issues are important and men's issues are important, and they talk past each other a lot, you know?
Sophia, when you were talking about all these people who promote these ideas and all their followers, and they're not concerned with personal growth and education and learning and supporting people, where we see a lot of evidence of this is the comments on all our social media and our posts and our videos. And so we just did a couple of episodes on the political issues, and I'm just looking at one of our videos now has over 100 comments, and they're all the kinds of things that you're talking about. They're vicious and they're awful. And I used to turn off comments, and now I'm just leaving them because I'm like, let these people do what they do and speak for themselves. They're doing it out there anyway. I can't imagine putting the energy into finding my opponent's work and what they're trying to educate people on and going and writing vicious, awful comments. What a waste of time and energy, and how cruel and awful. And I was just scrolling through, and I see one, many of them are like this, but I see one that reflects something that I know you wanted to talk about. Maybe we could talk about a little bit too. This comment on one of our recent videos on the Transgender School YouTube channel. It says, "Let kids be kids. No child should be mutilated. Child abuse should be stopped." So we see these comments every day, hundreds. And this is something I know you mentioned, that this whole this movement of rhetoric saying we need to protect kids. Some of us out there are trying to mutilate kids and abuse kids. There is no evidence that any of this is happening, but people are buying into it. They're believing it. They're finding programs like ours to comment and threaten and say these kinds of awful comments. What are your thoughts about that whole idea of protecting kids?
Protecting kids is a very classic type of rhetoric that you see basically going back forever. Protect the women, protect the kids, justify anything to do so. The genocide of the Indians was that sort of thing. Slavery, all the lynchings that have occurred is protecting white women, protecting children from being exposed to these so-called degenerate things. You see a lot of that sort of rhetoric in the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, for example. It's just all over in any type of issue where you need to get a base riled up and afraid of another group of people. You're gonna see it right there. And of course, we should protect everybody, including women and children. That's not what I'm arguing about here. This one is frustrating for me because I think if you look at the actual evidence and you look at the standards of care, you can see that overall trans youth programs are probably helping trans people. Okay, that seems are helping children. They're keeping children alive. They're keeping children healthy. That to me is protecting trans people, is protecting children. This mutilate children thing it's a weird, vicious meme that probably comes from someone just like Chris Rufo. It's an easy slogan. It's a soundbite that doesn't take any thought. It's actually probably a thought terminating phrase. It's going to inspire very strong emotions in anyone that reads that because it's mutilate children. That's very, very strong language, you know?
And it's not happening. It's not happening, right? I know you're probably about to say that, but it's, yeah, Jackie.
And Trump actually said this exact thing, I think a week or two ago. He got up on some stage and said, "Oh, parents are sending their kids to school and the kids are coming home mutilated 2 days later."
Yes, he said
That's
that.
not happening anywhere. That is complete fantasy and complete detachment from reality on every level. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating, and it's not surprising that Trump would come out and say those exact type of internet meme words because he has a terminally online right-wing staff, basically. Those people are probably literal 4chan, 8chan, dark internet weirdos. That's the same type of people that are around JD Vance. But besides that, it's not happening. Like you guys said, the standards of care for children, for young children before they hit puberty is a social transition where they try on a new name, they try on a change of clothes, they try on new pronouns. Then they see if that sticks. And this is all after probably a year or two of therapy. And all of the social transition stuff is very easily reversible, completely non-medical at all whatsoever. Then, if that sticks, depending on how far this goes along, the children, if they have a what's called a persistent gender identity, a persistent trans identity, then they get into the pubescent stages of things, where I don't think that we should be giving children under 18 surgery necessarily. I don't think that we should necessarily allow people with developing brains to go through these types of really severe medical interventions. I agree with that sort of thing. We need to have lots and lots of safeguards in that regard. Of course we do. It's exactly the difference between actually caring about the safety of children and just using a weaponized meme soundbite because you're being manipulated. And so what happens then, and this is something that I strongly advocate for, is that in order to preserve the opportunity for the decision to be made, you should allow the child to do puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are safe. They've been used for decades. They have almost fully reversible side effects. They are safe. They have very little side effects, if any at all. And then what that does is allow a kid to grow to figure out and to try on these gender identities and figure out if they're persistent or not. If they're actually trans, then they can transition. And they won't have secondary sex characteristics of the wrong gender. They won't go through the pain and trauma of going through the wrong puberty. They won't have troubles for passing. They won't have all the pain and suicidal ideation and self-harm that comes from those exact types of experiences. You stop all of that, which is protecting children. Then they transition when they understand they are an adult, they can make those decisions in a fully informed and well-reasoned manner. That's perfect. That's a solution. It's a win-win for both sides where you say, okay, what if they're wrong? Then it's like, okay, well, puberty blockers give them time to figure it out. It's a perfect safeguard. That's exactly why it's advocated for. And what it's being spun into is now you're just going to permanently damage their bodies with puberty blockers, which is completely not medically true at all. But again, this memeified, fear-mongering, disingenuous, bad faith sort of misleading discussion by bad faith actors, that's how you get the exact situation we're in. People don't want to read the studies. They don't want to learn about it. They don't want to engage with the process. They don't want to actually figure out what's really happening because that all takes work and because the internet is telling them that nothing will change anyways because they're in these terrible nihilistic circles, these cynical circles. On the other side of things, the people that think that the society is so bad that we need a violent revolution tomorrow. It's almost that same level of disengagement and calling for pretty extreme solutions. And that's not how society works. It's not how life works. Life works by figuring things out, getting the right answer, examining evidence, creating policies, engaging with the process, all these things that they don't want young men to do. They don't want people to do. You know?
That's boring. That's not exciting. That's not
yeah, exactly. It is boring and it is work. And that's why it's so frustrating to tie this back into the really, really small local politics of this community planning group. This is like the most micro level politics you could possibly have. It's not an actual elected official position, I don't think. It's basically an informal advisory group to the city council. So it exists below the city council level. No one is getting paid. Everybody is volunteer. There's no resources for operations. There's no resources for creating a website or a newsletter or recruiting people or a media operation. There's none of that involved. It's just people who care about their community for one reason or another, and they got involved in their community. And then you try to tell people about what's going on. You try to popularize what's happening. You try to get more people involved. You try to tell people about the issues and what you're trying to address.
That note of community engagement and encouraging people to get involved at a local level, especially, that's something that I've talked a lot about on this show, and I really believe in, especially if the getting engaged at a state or national level feels daunting and feels overwhelming and like you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. You can accomplish a lot if you get involved with your local government, because I guarantee you your local elected officials are used to hearing the same 15 people who write and call and show up at their office over and over and over again. So if you have opinions, if you have values that you want to see carried out in your community, definitely get engaged with your local government. And I would ask you, Sophia, do you have any other advice for people who want to get engaged in this stuff as residents of their community?
Yeah, I would love to. The biggest thing that I'll say is that it's incredibly easy. All you have to do is show up or even just send an email or a text message to anyone that's involved. Where this level of politics is always so strapped for people and for resources and for help. And again, I'll volunteer, so no one is having fun working really hard in a completely thankless job. But when you come in to ask them what they need, they'll have a list. They'll have tons of stuff that you can help with immediately, and they will welcome you with open arms. They'll beg for you to come. They're going to be very excited that you're there. So it's extremely easy. And then the other thing I would say is that it's really rewarding, especially like we're saying, if you have that sort of cynical, nihilistic, pessimistic outlook on society and you don't think things are going to change, this is a great thing to get involved in. It gives you back a sense of political agency and a sense of belonging to your community and a sense of contributing on the side of what you think is the right thing in the world, what you think is the force of good in the world. I think when you go from a sort of nihilistic, more dark perspective into a more agency based, action based, optimistic perspective, you'll see a lot of people that suddenly are a lot happier, are more optimistic, are closer to their communities. They are going to have friends in real life, which a lot of young people don't nowadays. Yeah, I think it's a great move for the community, for the groups, and for the individuals to all get involved a little bit more. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it. You don't have to get super involved, but they probably need someone to help run a newsletter. They probably need someone to help clean up their email list. They probably need someone to help hang up flyers. These are the small, really important, hard work things that happen at the local level. Anyone can do it. Everybody should do it, in my opinion. We'd have a much better society if more people got informed and got involved. I think it's great.
Thanks, Sophia. I really appreciate that. And I think that that's a good note to end this first episode on. And we really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us. I think it was really valuable. I think our audience is really going to enjoy it. And we encourage everyone to listen to the next episode, which we're going to record right now with Sophia. And we're going to talk a little bit more about her background. So thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for being with us, Sophia. I learned a lot, as I always do when we talk. I learned a lot from you, and I really appreciate all that you shared. It's so important for everyone to know.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. This stuff is important. I'm clearly passionate about it, and I always talk about society and the world and improving things. It's like a really big boulder on the edge of a hill, and if you're trying to push it by yourself, you can't do it. If more people come and put their hands on it, if you all push together, it's actually really easy then to get the boulder to tip over the side and then start going in a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious cycle of apathy and indifference. So yeah, so I'm super happy to do my hand on the boulder today in the podcast. I'm super happy to do it with you guys.
A beautiful metaphor to end with. Thank you, Sophia.
Oh, yeah.